Hey guys, it's Connor, and today we're getting straight to business. No, hi, how you doing? No, Connor, where have you been for the last 5 months? Not that! Okay? You don't know me. You don't know my life. Alright, maybe I was going through something. Alright, sue me. Don't sue me. But as of recording on August 31st, IGN officially released their last piece of content in a month-long coverage of WB Montreal's next big title, Gotham Knights. Which for me now means it is an ample time and opportunity to give you my thoughts on the upcoming game, given that we have a ton of new information to parse through and even speculate about, since my ADD-riddled brain does have some ideas of where the narrative is going to be going in this game. In particular, this is kind of a big moment for WB Montreal. You could say that it's their chance at redemption, due to the middling reception of Arkham Origins, their first game, which served as a prequel to the legendary Rocksteady Arkham trilogy. Now, while I do think that Origins is a much better game than people let on about, it's definitely not without its flaws. I mean, when I originally played the game at launch, I remember in particular the extremely poor performance I had while playing on Xbox 360 while trying to fight large groups of enemies or handle one of the riot activities that they had. It was so bad at certain points that the game would legit crash on me 1 to 2 times during a play session. And I honestly don't know if those issues ever got fixed, but like I said, it wasn't all bad, since some of the ideas WB Montreal presented in Origins were actually really good. The detective sequences that they had, where Batman was essentially just looking at a crime scene and putting it together with his detective vision mode, were really cool, along with arguably having the best story in all of the Arkham games. I mean, Batman set at Christmas time is always going to be a great thing. I even liked how they added into the free flow combat system by incorporating different enemy variations and different armor types. Origins also had some of the more memorable boss fight sections, most notably that Deathstroke fight. It's pretty great. But what exactly does this mean for Gotham Knights? Well, let's jump in and get to today's first section, world and story. So the premise is Batman is dead. Okay, yeah, right. And it's up to the Bat family to protect Gotham in his absence, along with unraveling the mystery of the Court of Owls, a new supervillain group that has appeared. That's it. That's all the info we have involving the main story of this game at this point. IGN in particular, during their coverage, said that they've been kept in the dark about the main story, even saying WB Montreal wasn't willing to comment or speak any further of it, which is kind of crazy. But obviously, as someone who's been reading comics for the past 15, 16 years, I think it's safe to say most people who have read the Court of Owls storyline by Scott Snyder will generally know where the story is heading, aside from whatever narrative elements WB wants to possibly change/tweak with. We have seen some images and footage of the court as well, and for the most part, it's pretty spot on. The Court of Owls storyline in general is very interesting, and it's kind of a big, huge shift within Batman comics because it heavily relies on the surprising element of Batman even finding out that they exist in the first place, along with the history of Gotham City, its founding families, and the true past that Batman has to uncover in that book. The Court of Owls storyline is also very reliant on the relationship the group has with Batman and how it completely shatters his ego and any preconceived notions that he knows Gotham City better than anyone else. So it'll be interesting to see how WB Montreal addresses that, because honestly, I'm not buying that Batman is dead in this game. I think he's very much alive in this game and will be playable towards the end, with most of his content being the quote-unquote endgame content WB Montreal has been talking about. Because if they are following this comic storyline in any real way, I'd be willing to bet that Bruce is somewhere underneath the city. And to prevent any further spoilers, that's all I'll say right now. And while I can't really comment on how good or not this version of the Court of Owls is, or how accurate or not accurate they are, I can talk about how seemingly WB Montreal has put a lot of time and passion into the actual Gotham City they've made. One of the best videos that came out of the IGN coverage was their Building a Brand New Gotham City video, where Montreal explained at length at how seriously they took the lore and world building for this game, since it is set within its own universe and will not be a continuation of the Arkham franchise's continuity, which obviously gives them a lot of room to carve out their own new original narrative instead of trying to continue the story at the end of Arkham Knight. So I would expect some twists and turns from Montreal in that regard. The video also gives you a very extensive look at the actual city, which I can't lie, looks like the biggest Gotham City rendered yet, dripping with the stereotypical atmosphere tropes you would kind of expect with a Gotham City, you know, raining, very dark, neon lights, fog, etc. The city is divided up into 5 boroughs, each with their own identity that reflects the history of one of the 5 founding families of Gotham, which are the Waynes, the Arkhams, the Cobblepots, the Kanes, and the Elliots. Gotham will also change as you progress through the game in a similar manner to how Arkham City and Arkham Knight did, meaning after certain story beats, parts of the city might look different. For example, the first demo showed that the first demo showed for this game that came out, I believe, during DC Fandom. Mr. Freeze has iced up a section of the city and even a skyscraper, which is cool. I like when games change up the environment whilst progressing through the story. It does give you that effect that you, as the player, are actually affecting the world that you're playing in. So Montreal has spoken about their approach to level design as well, and that while players will be spending most of their time exploring their Gotham City, underground sections and skyscraper sections have been confirmed. Once again, using that Mr. Freeze example, Montreal specifically have crafted a self-described intricate level set within the skyscraper Freeze is claimed. So at the very least, there will be some interesting locations to explore and some possible interesting setups for missions. I think I should also note that since we're talking about other villains, there will be individual quest lines for some of Batman's rogues gallery. Mr. Freeze, Harley Quinn, the Penguin, and Clayface are the ones that are confirmed right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is many more included in this game come release. Each villain in Gotham Knights is said to have their own hefty storyline that really has nothing to do with the overall main story. Also, a lot of these villains will have their own gangs/factions scattered throughout the city, committing various nefarious crimes that you, as the player, have the option of stopping. In terms of my concerns, though, for this open world, right, I will say that based off of the footage they've been showing, Gotham City doesn't really appear to be that alive as they've kind of been talking about. And a lot of the gameplay footage from the streets, it seems fairly empty aside from a group of enemy NPCs. I mean, you don't even really see any other vehicles driving on the street as you're passing by. I can't obviously judge this properly until it releases, but I hope at the very least civilians aren't completely missing from the game. That was something that was always a big complaint of mine with the Arkham series, especially Arkham Knight. A huge part of the superhero fantasy is saving civilians in a very lively city. You know, so making an open world that feels alive in this day and age is definitely very difficult and a tall order to ask of a lot of developers. And personally, I don't hold anything against any devs that just can't do it. But there is at least a bare minimum standard a lot of players expect when releasing open world games at this point. So hopefully Montreal is able to fulfill and meet that standard. Overall, I very much like what I've seen of the city, and since story details are slim, the majority of what has been shown is the ARPG elements and the combat that has left a lot of people feeling divided on the game's quality. So let's jump into section 2, gameplay and combat. So I briefly wanted to say that obviously with this being an open world game, like I stated in the previous section, that means a lot of the normal tropes inherent to the genre will be there. Aside from main missions and side quests and those villain quests, there does appear to be collectibles scattered all across the districts, along with random crimes that generate throughout the city involving the different gangs and factions. An interesting aspect that Montreal has been talking about within the city is the detective element, meaning that sometimes when coming across random crimes or quest lines, you'll have to pick and choose what crimes to investigate, which ones to follow up on, or which ones that you just leave alone. I kind of like hearing that. However, they didn't really go into depth about how you'll be actively going about investigating crimes. I'd assume maybe a marker on the map appears, or maybe you stumble across it in the open world, and when you do, you know, a quest line specifically for that crime will open up. They also didn't confirm if there will be any combat or stealth challenge maps in the vein of the Arkham games challenge maps. I'd be shocked if there wasn't some version of this in the final game, because I'll be honest, I always really like those challenges a lot. Now, we've gotten most of the basic information out of the way, and if you're familiar with open worlds in general, I probably didn't have to tell you too much of that. Now, the thing I really want to discuss is the ARPG nature of Gotham Knights, along with a bit of its co-op aspect. Like I said at the end of Section 2, these elements have left a lot of people conflicted on this game, which I think is understandable and not completely invalid for the most part. I do think some of the complaints are kind of weird, but, you know, it is what it is. A lot of the coverage of this game has been showing off its combat system and skill trees. At first glance, the combat is much slower, and you could even say clunkier when comparing it to the free-flow combat of the Arkham games. But keep in mind, like they've said, this is not an Arkham game, right? This is Montreal's attempt at making an action RPG. Now, while the combat at its base level does share some similarities between the Arkham games, Gotham Knights is really trying to focus on a different, unique sort of play style you can have with each of the 4 playable characters. Unlike in the Arkham games, which, to be fair, all kind of played the same and were all kind of one note at a certain point. Montreal has said that when designing for these characters and their skills, inherent classes organically came about during the development process. For example, the character who has been shown off the most is Red Hood. Red Hood is Montreal's ranged character, which is what they've said in their own words. However, they don't want players to feel like they just have to stick with the ranged playstyle. So, in the skill tab for Red Hood, 4 skill trees appear labeled as Marksman, Brawler, Vengeance, and Knighthood. Marksman is, of course, focusing on Red Hood's damage per second and ranged abilities, right? The abilities that they initially kind of had in mind with him being a ranged character. Brawler focuses on the hand-to-hand combat for those who like to get up close and personal, and Vengeance is more focused on big damage abilities. Knighthood, the 4th skill tree, is a skill tree that all of the characters have, and they were kind of a little wishy-washy on what that exactly means, but the Knighthood tree is essentially going to focus on character-specific moves that you want to add to your arsenal to make your characters like a bit more unique from one another. Momentum abilities in the second menu in the abilities tab, which are described as basically your special moves during combat. For example, a simple one is Red Hood's Barrage ability, which can be activated by holding down R1 and triangle, which fires multiple rounds at whatever, you know, bad guy is in front of Red Hood at the time. These skills all have cooldowns associated with them, which makes sense given the ARPG nature of the game, which keeps in line with the other combat systems within the same genre. Now, one thing that did kind of stick out is that certain skills are locked until certain challenges for those individual characters are completed, which gives you, I guess, as the player, more motivation and or incentive to complete those challenges instead of ignoring them. And obviously, some, if not most, of the skills will be unlocked traditionally through leveling up your character, earning XP, and then spending them skill points, all right? I really like the amount of flexibility within each individual character that Montreal says they're going to be, right? Says, we won't know until launch, but they are saying that. My question and concern then becomes, is WB Montreal designing these classes and skills in mind when making combat encounters and missions all throughout the game? This is a modern problem that a lot of ARPGs have, in my opinion. Devs will give you all of these options and all of these different skills with different stat boosts, but don't really design the combat with those particular skills or builds in mind. For me, the easiest example that I can think of are the modern Assassin's Creed games when it comes to that. Valhalla, in particular, the most recent release, had like the biggest skill tree out of all of the games, but the majority of the combat encounters are pretty much all the same, with not a ton of variety to be had. What this is really going to come down to, for me, is the amount of enemy variation within Gotham Knights, along with how smart/difficult the AI is going to be. You can give me all of these options all if you want, but if your combat isn't designed with those things in mind from the very beginning of development, it makes it kind of feel hollow and repetitive once players have their hands on it. For me, though, I do think the combat looks good, and the supposed layer of depth, like I said, if there, is super appealing to me. I personally don't care if the combat looks slower than the Arkham games, right? Because I've played multiple games with very slow, methodical combat that I really end up enjoying and find extremely satisfying. So I hope the same case can be said for Gotham Knights. Now, the co-op for the game is also interesting, given that 2 players can team up with each other. You can also choose the same character as the person you're joining up with. For example, the video that IGN posted was 2 different Red Hood builds playing at once. One of the Red Hoods being a marksman-focused Red Hood, the other being a brawler-focused Red Hood. What makes the co-op unique is that while both players can use the same hero, they won't be able to use both of or I think what they said is they won't be able to use the same exact skills, right? This is kind of in the hopes that players, while playing with a buddy, will sort of specialize and focus on the skills inherent to whatever they want their build to be, right? You want it to be a marksman build, you want it to be a brawler build, you know, that's how they're basically going to decide who gets what skills when coming together for co-op. Now, traversal for each character has been shown, each with their own different way of getting around Gotham. Nightwing has a glider, Robin has this like teleportation tech bullshit, I don't really know what it is. Red Hood has a spirit jump thing, which a lot of people thought was funny. To be honest, it is kind of funny looking. And Batgirl glides with her cape, like traditionally how Batman did in the Arkham games. All 4 also have grapple guns as well. Stealth has been shown off just a little bit, which looks extremely similar to the stealth in the Arkham titles, which is fine for me, since I always really liked how those games handled stealth to begin with. Loot and cosmetics are also a big part of the gameplay loop. IGN did a full breakdown talking about the various suits within the game, even with more suits coming post-launch, which is actually kind of interesting to hear. Each suit has its own stats and attributes to them. You can also change the color of the suits, along with being able to change the appearance of 4 pieces of gear with each individual suit, which is the cowl, the chest emblem, the gauntlets, and the boots. Cosmetics aside, the actual loot functions similarly to how Crystal Dynamics' Avengers game does, meaning you, the player, will pick up different gear or different weapons that doesn't actually change the look of your armor, your suit, or your actual weapon that you're using, but instead boosts and gives you different stats and attributes. This, once again, keeps in line with what Montreal has said about wanting to give players flexibility in every aspect for their character, making sure that their hero feels like its own unique individual. In closing, the combat honestly has me more intrigued than the story at this point, and I'm very hopeful about the game after seeing the extensive gameplay footage on the IGN month-long coverage. So, fingers crossed that WB Montreal can really deliver in that regard. In closing, I'm wrapping this bitch up, all right? I'm over it. I'm done. We're getting out of here, all right? I am very hopeful about this game, despite how a lot of people within the gaming community feel. A lot of my excitement is sort of garnered around the fact that somebody is actually doing something with the Court of Owls outside of the comics, let alone also having a fully realized and rendered Gotham City, finally, even though Arkham Knight kind of was, but really wasn't. But you know what? I'm not stupid, guys, all right? I guarantee that there's somebody watching this calling me biased or dumb, saying, Connor, you're dumb. You're a big dumb asshole with a dumb microphone. You suck. Gotham Knights sucks. Looks trash. Last gen. None of that. Whatever. Okay. I don't really care about that because I always operate with the one belief that when it comes to video games, I can't really judge it until I get my hands on it and until I actually get to play it, right? We can armchair analyze and speculate all we want about if something is going to be good or if something is going to be bad, but I've played too many video games in my life to know that just sometimes, guys, video games don't show off well. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy is the perfect example because everyone had written that game off before it released. And then come release, when people actually got their hands on it and actually got to play it, the public consensus changed completely. It was a complete 180, right? Which is not me saying that those people voicing their complaints about Gotham Knights are wrong for feeling that way. But like I said, I'm always willing to give the game a benefit of the doubt until proven wrong, right? If the game turns out bad, I will definitely talk about that. I have to. I cannot not talk about that, right? Speaking of, I did think it was a bit of a red flag hearing that IGN in their last video for the Gotham Knights coverage did not get to play the game, but instead just watched the devs play. That is strange and possibly worrisome. Like, you're confident enough to show off your game extensively for a month on IGN, but you're not confident enough to have these people play it. Like, I don't know. But, you know, it's not without its merits, right? Like, I appreciate that WB Montreal is willing to show off the game to this extent, because with a lot of modern video game companies nowadays, coverage like this just doesn't happen anymore. So I appreciate the transparency from them being like, what you see is what you get, dog. Like, this is it. Like, it's going to be this come release, right? And, you know, I just can't wait, man. It's probably one of my most anticipated titles, and, you know, I'm either going to get what I want or I'm going to, you know, get a lot of heartbreak going. So with that said, I'm going to close this video out. Please like, comment, and subscribe down below if you really liked the video. Please check out my other content I have up on the channel. As far as my next video, I should have something up soon discussing the paradigm shift happening over at WB proper since the Discovery acquisition and all of the strange news and cancellation that's happened over the past few weeks. So that'll be fun. It's also almost the holiday season as well, boys, which means big, highly anticipated video games is coming and being released very, very soon. So definitely be on the lookout for that in the coming weeks. I should be covering God of War Ragnarok, like I said, Gotham Knights, Bayonetta 3, Tactics, Ogre, and many, many more. So with that said, my name is Connor. Thanks for stopping by, and until next time, stay groovy, y'all.